Good evening. I'm Dorothea DiCecco, and this is Wake Up America. Very glad to be with you this evening. I have a special guest. His name is Ronald D. Whitmont. He's an MD, and he'll have some interesting information for you. Dr. Whitmont is a homeopath. He practices in New York State, just over the border in Rhinebeck, New York. And so he's come here to Litchfield to be interviewed, and we'll talk about the circumstances and all of that as we move along. But I'd like to just really get started with the program, introduce you to Dr. Whitmont, and have him talk a little bit about himself, his background, and how he entered homeopathy as a profession in medicine. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dorothea.
Nice to have you come drive this long distance to get here.
On a cold night.
Yes, on a very cold night. I'd like to start by having you tell us something about yourself, personal material, where you're from, and how you became interested in homeopathy as a start.
Sure. I'm a New Yorker from birth, and I grew up in Westchester County and was raised in a family that used homeopathy as its only form of medicine. And so I was introduced to the medical practice of homeopathy from birth. And from my dad was a homeopath and also a Jungian analyst. And he raised all 5 children using homeopathy, and that gave me the experience of really never seeing a conventional physician until I was about 14 years old, and I sprained my wrist. And I went to the emergency room. And probably those experiences of going to the emergency room convinced me that I wanted to become a physician myself and eventually practice homeopathy, which is what I did. So I went to conventional medical school. I went to downstate medical school in Brooklyn, New York. And I graduated in the late 80s on a military scholarship, and worked for the United States Navy as a medical officer for about 4 years after that, and eventually decided between going into psychiatry or going into internal medicine. I chose internal medicine and completed a residency program in internal medicine in Reading, Pennsylvania, and then started my own practice in homeopathy after that. That was in around 1995. So I've been in practice about 24 years so far of just doing homeopathy.
That's amazing. It's a long time, isn't it, when you think about it?
It went by very quickly.
Yes, life does that.
It does.
Well, I think in a sense it's unusual for a person to grow up in a family, who one parent was a homeopath, that's all you knew in medicine, and apparently it was successful in the sense that you didn't need to go to see a, quote, regular doctor. Not that you're not a regular doctor yourself, but I'm just saying the allopathic, as they're called.
Right.
And you didn't have to take any drugs or so-called drugs.
Yeah.
And you manage with
that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, and that's what we should talk about.
Sure.
But again, your practice in New York has been there for how many years now?
I was first in Amenia, New York, which is of course right over the border from Sharon, Connecticut. And I was there for about 4 years. And then in around 2000, we moved to Rhinebeck, and I set up a private practice there. So I've been there for almost 19 years just in Rhinebeck.
I see.
Yeah.
Yes, it's right. I know where it is because I've been there, and I just want to say to the audience that I met Dr. Whitmont through other people that knew him because I'm here in northwestern Connecticut. My husband's grandfather was a homeopath in Waterbury, Connecticut.
That's right.
And I spent
a well-known homeopath.
The evening talking about him. But just as a mention of why I thought I should have you here, because since I left New Hampshire, where I was born and lived, and went through my education, college and grad school, I had never heard, I've heard of homeopathy, but I had never known a homeopath and never really understood what it was.
Yeah.
But when I came to Connecticut and got married to a person from the Waterbury area, I learned of his grandfather, who was a major homeopath in Waterbury, Connecticut, but then I found was like internationally known for his work and how successful he was, and how, again, like in your family, this family grew up on homeopathy and never went to a drug or a drugstore or anything like that. And it was interesting to me. And so I found it very logical, in the sense, just looking at the record of this, the way it worked with that family and my husband and all his relatives and so forth. And that's how I raised my kids, on totally
Using
homeopathy. And they continue to do it. And
they were healthy.
Yeah, and they were healthy.
Yeah.
And they didn't have, well, they didn't really even have the childhood disease, so-called, you know, like measles and things that I had, which I was kind of hoping they might get, in a sense, to build a resistance against it, but they never had chickenpox or measles or any of those things.
Or at least not that you noticed.
Not that I noticed. That's right. That could be the case. Yeah. But they had some pretty dramatic treatments with homeopathy. Yeah. And
well, it's a very strong form of medicine. Yes. And it is definitely health promoting. We talk about not just treating someone for their acute conditions or what they have that day, but one of the very nice things about homeopathic medicine is it keeps people healthy, and it promotes long-term health, which is kind of a controversial issue today. So I grew up in a homeopathic family as well, and that was all I knew growing up. But trying to explain that to my friends and my colleagues as a child was not so easy to do. Yes. It's a very different approach to medicine, and one that has sort of different layers of understanding, if you will. We understand how conventional medicine works for the most part. You have a disease, you have a condition, and you treat it with a drug for that condition. But homeopathy is different because it's quite holistic. We don't treat people by the disease per se. We tend to treat them as whole people. And knowing about who the person is as important as knowing what the disease is. And that's really one of the major differences between homeopathy and conventional medicine.
May I just intervene and say that conventional medicine, if you go into the doctor's office and you say, well, I have a sore hand, and they just say, well, let's take a look and whatever, they might take an x-ray or something and say, well, take this pill, they write a prescription and try it for a week or so and come back and let me know how it is. But if you go to a homeopath or something like that, they will sit and chat with you for a while to learn about what else is wrong with you. Do you have any other, maybe you don't have any other symptoms, but, well, I have a sore neck sometimes, and I seem to have some allergies, but you think, why should I tell him that? Because I'm here for my hand, you know, that's what you're used to. But you will talk about family and what has the family had, you know, relatives, your parents perhaps, and so forth. And just talk about, that's what you mean by the whole person, and even stress or mental problems perhaps, that's all of you. And so you prescribe something on the basis of the whole person.
That's right.
And
that's right.
And you allow, I mean, the immune system is what is stimulated in a sense. Is it to help you cure yourself? You didn't give them a drug or a medicine for the hand. You give them something. And it's amazing that works if it's done right.
Well, what you're saying really is that it's amazing that the body has the capacity to heal. And that's really what homeopathy is based on. That we try not to interfere with the body's homeostatic properties, and homeostasis is the body's ability to correct itself. We try not to interfere with that, and we try to encourage and promote those natural health processes. So it's funny that you mentioned that example of a hand, whereas if you go to a conventional physician, one of the things they will most frequently do for kind of a hand injury is prescribe an anti-inflammatory medicine, which is essentially to control the pain and to control inflammation. It so happens that even using that medicine tends to inhibit the healing process. We know that the anti-inflammatory group of drugs, they slow down healing. Why would you give that to someone who has an injury? Mostly because you're controlling pain. Homeopaths will generally not try to control the pain directly. In the instance that you're giving me, I might give a medicine like arnica or a different homeopathic medicine that actually promotes the body's recovery process, and the pain spontaneously resolves as a result of it. So we don't generally use opiates and anti-inflammatory medicines. We use medicines that are designed and actually utilized to promote healing. And when healing comes about, health improves, and you reduce right there at the outset a large risk of complications from other interventions that you might use if you were going to see a conventional physician. So that's why I say it actually can promote long-term health and recovery as well as short-term recovery and well-being.
Now, this method of treatment, of course, is so different. I just want to say how the so-called drugs that will dominate our whole society at this point.
They do.
They weren't used, I mean, they didn't exist as such. People used remedies at home, remedies, well, for thousands of years. People did things
Herbs
and found all kinds
poultices.
of natural things.
Sure.
And they worked.
Yes, they
and a
did.
lot of
Many
those
of
are
them.
still used today.
Yes.
And
But not to confuse that with homeopathy.
No, I know,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying that, but when they discovered penicillin,
Sure.
and during World War II they didn't have it, but then it was, somebody found penicillin from this mold, right?
Right,
That produced
right.
a chemical that killed bacteria.
Right.
And they gave it to people, and it did get rid of the infection immediately, more or less, you
That's
know,
correct.
and they thought, wow, this is wonderful, a wonder drug.
Right.
And so they used it, and people said, wow, I can make some money on this thing. Why not? It was getting, let's make it even more popular. And it became a business and made tons of money in the beginning. And that sort of set the stage for other so-called, medical research, looking for another chemical that this one may not have treated, these bacteria, these particular bacteria that were susceptible. It didn't kill all of them. And so they found other ones, and many of them from fungi, like this one was.
Absolutely.
And then they started making artificially produced,
Synthetic.
similar synthetic ones that maybe were based on the chemistry of some that already existed. And it grew and grew, and then outside of that realm of microbial chemicals, the others appeared that would get rid of depression or get rid of something else. And, but now we hear on television, particularly, anytime you turn it on, there's an ad.
There's an ad for drugs.
For something.
Not only television, but if you turn on, open up a magazine.
Or magazines,
The second largest buyer of advertising time and advertising space in the United States is the medical field, and specifically the pharmaceutical industry. But it's interesting that you should mention antibiotics. That really was one of the major shifts in the medical field that kind of pushed conventional medicine forward. And that did take place in the 1940s, even though the discovery had taken place a little earlier than that. But it's interesting that we're learning today that there are deep ramifications to that method of treatment, and that very short, focused, acute approach to treating an infection with an antibiotic has very, very significant downsides. So much so that these drugs, namely the antibiotics and other drugs that affect the immune system, are responsible for a huge epidemic, really, of chronic inflammatory diseases today. And so what looks like a brilliant miracle drug, and it was, has very, very important long-term downsides and long-term side effects that were never considered at the time because it was a quick fix. And quick fixes, we all love quick fixes, but very little research was done until very recently, really the last 5 or so years, in something called the Human Microbiome Project, which began to look at all the microbial life on our bodies and discovered that, lo and behold, these microbes are essential to our health and well-being, and that when we carelessly use antibiotics, we damage them and we cause long-term problems. That's not homeopathic in itself, but that does essentially support the entire homeopathic approach that has been used for the last 200 years.
Yeah, we've never learned about the so-called microbiome that everybody seems to have in their vocabulary now. You know, they sell chemicals that you can take to or add microorganisms. Probiotics.
Yes.
That's right. Everybody's taking probiotics.
Right.
All of a sudden, this is the rage.
Yes.
But I mean, it makes sense in the that they are important.
Yes.
But just taking them in doses is,
well, that's marketing.
Yeah,
you have
I know.
marketing that without the backup of science.
Yeah.
But it's, if you imagine what do we do when we organically farm? What do we do? Well, we try to promote the health of the soil.
Yes.
We put nutrients back into the soil. We make sure when the soil has nutrients, a whole ecology of microorganisms live there, and this ecology supports the life of the plants and the life of the garden, and then that supports the nutrition of the plants that are growing. So what we've realized is that the body is just like organic gardening. When you organically farm the body, when you organically treat the body, and I don't just mean with organic foods, but I mean without the chemicals that destroy and damage the soil, so to speak, you end up with a healthier organism,
Yes.
a healthier body that lives longer, that is healthier, that deals with infections and other conditions in a much healthier way.
Yeah, and also from the soil. I mean, if the soil is healthy, as you said, the type of microorganisms, the types,
Yeah.
I mean, they're all in there working together.
Yes,
And they have their own
diverse.
lifestyle and whatever.
bet.
We're totally unaware of them.
You
But
bet.
you pull something out of the ground, it has some soil on it, microorganisms, you rinse it a little bit, but you're ingesting those as well.
That's
and
correct.
They go into our bodies
That's right.
and inhabit the body
Yes.
and help keep us healthy
They do.
from maybe a harmful one that might come in that
Yeah.
could take over, but these guys are there first and they're stronger, and
Yeah.
whatever, and keep
Yeah.
us healthy. So it's important that I think many people now are learning about the biome and the human biome and the
Yes.
necessity of keeping those bacteria
That's
there.
right.
But rather than promote a good diet and healthy lifestyle, they just say, take this drink and you'll be better off.
Right.
And,
Well, it's sort of
and-
like take this drug
Yeah,
and you'll be
I
better
know.
off.
So
and
everything
don't
is-
bother to change.
Yeah, and it's not natural. I mean, we're part of the whole system of life here and not any more important than one or another creature. So we've got to get back to nature and living with it, as you were just saying.
Yeah.
But going back again to the remedies, as we call them,
The
right?
homeopathic
Homeopathic medicines
Yeah.
are sometimes nicknamed a remedy, whatever. But would you like to talk a little about the history of that and how this idea
Sure.
came forth and
Sure.
developed, its history?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, the gentleman physician who actually established the practice of homeopathy was a physician named Samuel Hahnemann, who was German and was a scholar and a very well-educated man who practiced in the late 1700s, when medicine was really in its very primitive stages. And he was dumbfounded by the practices of his time and thought that the medical practices were such that they were more harmful to people than the actual diseases. Okay, and he stopped the practice of medicine, but he had a large family that he had to support, and he began translating medical texts. He spoke many different languages and was fluent in them. And through the process of translating medical texts, he was translating a piece of work by a Scottish pharmacist named William Cullen, who was describing the qualities of an herb called Peruvian bark, or cinchona. And in the midst of the treatise that he was translating, there was terminology and phrases that suggested that Cullen believed that this bark worked because it was bitter and it was astringent. And Hahnemann thought to himself, this is absurd. It doesn't make any sense to me. And because he had read everything back to Hippocrates and Paracelsus and a lot of different physicians throughout the years, he was on to a different idea of thinking. And he thought to himself, what would happen if I started taking this herb? I'm not sick. I'm not, there's nothing the matter with me. I'm a healthy person. What would happen if I started taking this as a healthy person? And this thought, this idea, was a revolutionary thought, because no one up until that point had actually ever thought of the idea of giving someone an herb to see what does it do in a healthy person before you give it to a sick person. The herb Peruvian bark had been used at the time to treat these recurring fevers, very similar to malaria. They were malarial type fevers where you're good for a day and then the fever comes back and you get better, and you're good for a day and the fever comes back, and it keeps recurring. Hahnemann started ingesting small quantities of this herb that was supposed to be bitter, and lo and behold, after some time, he began developing symptoms of fever and malaise, and a lot of the symptoms he had were the same symptoms of the disease that the herb was purportedly helpful in treating.
So they were using that herb at that time to treat malaria?
That's
or that.
Correct.
Okay,
that's
so
correct.
That's why he...
And a light bulb went off on his head, went off in his head, and he said, I don't like Cullen's idea of it being astringent. That doesn't make sense to me. There's so many different astringent herbs and chemicals that don't work to treat this disease. Why does this one work?
Tell us what astringent means.
Astringent is, you know, it's a bitter quality to the herb, and, and it has different chemical properties.
Okay, thanks.
But he said maybe there's another relationship why it's working, and so he started testing other substances, and lo and behold, for every substance he started taking and sort of almost overdosing in, he would start getting symptoms. And from that work, he went on to have family members take different things, and colleagues started taking different things, and started cataloging. What are the symptoms you get when you take cinchona? What are the symptoms that you get when you take the belladonna alkaloid? What are the symptoms that you get when you take a calcium carbonate? And lo and behold, every single thing he tried, people could get sick from it.
So he recorded all the symptoms that these chemicals, or plants or minerals, whatever.
So he very meticulously performed drug trials in healthy people. And if you give anyone enough of any particular drug, it can eventually become toxic. Oxygen is toxic if you have too much of it. Water is toxic if you have too much of it. Anything can essentially start presenting with symptoms. From that point, he cataloged in his lifetime about 100 different drug products. Some of them were just regular drugs that were in use, some of them were herbs, some were minerals, and some were animal products. From that point, he started testing what happens if I give small quantities of those very things that, let's say, the cinchona would produce fever. He gave it to someone who had fever. What would happen? And lo and behold, he found that those people who received medicines that were capable of producing a similar picture, they healed faster, they recovered faster than if you left them alone. And he went through this, he tested it, he tried it again, he did it blindly, he did it without people knowing. He just kept repeating these experiments to try to convince himself that what he was seeing was accurate and it was reproducible. And from that point, he started actually publishing his results and telling his colleagues about it. And the ones who tried it were amazed, and they began doing it as well. And from the late 1700s, homeopathy spread around the world. It went to Europe, it went to India, it went to the United States, and it's been in use ever since. Along the way, as I said, Hahnemann would experiment with different concentrations, different amounts, different frequency of repetition, and he found that with a lot of the products, if you gave too much, people would get sicker, particularly if you're dealing with poisonous substances like mercury or dangerous things. So he started lowering the dose. He started giving them less and less. And he stumbled across a very paradoxical process that is not homeopathy at all. It is a way of delivering homeopathy, and that is what we call the minimum dose. And it turns out that you can actually reduce the dose substantially and still get a healing positive effect. And in fact, you can reduce the dose so much that it's very hard to even locate the original substance. But the medicine didn't stop working, which was the phenomenal thing, and actually the main issue that people take against homeopathy today. But I want to remind you that that issue of how much you give or how small the dose is has almost nothing to do with homeopathy itself. That issue is just how we've found to be the safest way of delivering homeopathy. But homeopathy is, in a nutshell, the law of similars. Using a medicine that's capable of producing a similar pattern of symptoms in someone who presents with those patterns of symptoms in their illness. We match up the similar patterns. The closer they match, the more effective the cure.
Yes.
And the more rapid the cure.
Now, the medicine that's given, that the homeopaths use, we'll call it that, but some of these are plant derived, right?
Yes, they are.
And they might be from a leaf, a stem, a root, a flower.
All the parts.
Or the entire
or the
plant.
Entire plant.
So there's a wide range of plants.
Yes.
And it's not, but what other, like you said, minerals you can use?
Yeah, there are
elements,
minerals.
Salts of different.
Yes, salts have been used, everything from magnesium sulfate to sodium chloride, to calcium carbonate, to potassium phosphate. Really, any medicine, any substance can be studied to determine what symptoms it can create and what symptoms, therefore, it can resolve. And animal parts are also used.
Oh, yes.
So there are venoms that are used.
Oh, yes.
The bee venom is a medicine called Apis mellifica. Actually, it's the entire honeybee that's used. But there are venoms of snakes that are utilized. And so, but each time a medicine was selected, it had to be tested on healthy people.
I'm just thinking of the amount of work he had to do. Now,
it's
he had
incredible.
students helping him,
He
didn't
did.
A lot of people came because they liked his successes with patients and whatever, and joined.
But since that time, in his lifetime, he tested, or what we call proved, he ran the provings of about 100 different substances.
Wow.
But today we have provings, very concrete, solid provings of over 1,000 different medicines. And there's even more than those that have limited provings or partial provings or limited understanding, and they're used. But the United States Food and Drug Administration recognizes homeopathic medicines and has recognized homeopathic medicines since 1938. So they are part of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. And that means that the homeopathic pharmacopoeia, which is the formulary of homeopathic medicines, is actually part of our national formulary. It has been approved by and somewhat regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And it continues today. It's still in use. The same medicines have been used for 200 years, and many more are being added to that formulary on an annual basis. But it's curious, as we know, when you look at what medicines have we used conventionally, they're always changing. They'll come up with the greatest wonder drug, and then 2 years later, well, don't use that drug anymore. Try this drug. And we know that from every class of drug agents, there's this turnover. And I think part of it has to do with you can only patent a drug for so long, and you can only make large amounts of money for so long, and then it becomes licensable as a generic medicine. Whereas with homeopathic medicines, we have used the same medicines that Hahnemann used 200 years ago are still in widespread use, and probably they are still the most popular medicines used today. They're known as polycrests, meaning they turn up more often, they're useful more often. For some reason, the medicines that he actually investigated turned out to be some of the most useful medicines we have in our formulary.
Incredible.
200 years ago. Yeah.
You mentioned animal parts or products, and
Sure.
I'll just mention a personal thing. I had symptoms of rapid heartbeat. By the time when I first started teaching in my 20s, I leaned over one day in the lab doing something. My heart started racing, and I thought, wow. And then it just stopped, and I didn't think anything of it. I was a young person. I was healthy. I didn't feel sick or anything. And then it would recur now and then. And it ended up that I knew a chiropractor, a man who was really an incredible person, and he always stopped it by giving me a neck adjustment.
Carotid.
Yeah.
Carotid massage.
And he would just stop it. It would go on maybe an hour, and I'd just go over there, and he'd do that, and I'd say, okay, bye, and it would, but it just would recur. In any case, many years I had this, maybe 15, 20 years. Never thought anything of it, because he had said it's not affecting your heart. There's nothing, don't worry about it. It's not like a heart attack or anything like that. And I didn't. One day it started. I was lecturing, and I just kept going, and I said, oh well. So I finished the lecture, dismissed the students, cleaned up the lab, called the chiropractor, the daughter now that took over, went to her, and she was treating me, but she couldn't stop it this time. She did it many times. So she said, maybe you'd better wait in the waiting room, and I'll try again. And I did twice. And so I drove home, and she said, you're driving? I said, well, I feel fine. It's just my heart's going like 180, 190 beats a minute. So I got home, and it was still going, and so I'm sitting there. And I remembered a homeopath that one of my children had.
Yes.
And I had to, but I called, and he said, well, try some lachesis.
Lachesis. Which is made from a snake venom.
Snake, it's the Amazon
snake.
Snake,
Yeah,
right.
it's a bushmaster.
And this, when you get bitten by the venom, that is a major symptom.
That's a major symptom.
So we happen to have the remedies of Dr. Hayes, the grandfather. When he died, the mother got them, and then now they're in our house. So we have like 8,000, remedies all in these cases downstairs. So I said to my husband, get the lachesis. So he went down and brought it up to me, and I took it, and in about 20 minutes, it just stopped.
What took so long?
I don't know. Maybe less.
That was a slow one.
Maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
But it's still, and it stopped, and I have not had it since, ever.
Yeah.
And that must have been, I don't know, 25 years ago again. Yeah. Nothing. And I thought it had to have been that, because what else can I say?
Well, why hasn't it come back?
I know, it has not come back.
Yeah. And see, you're putting your finger on a very important distinction between what a homeopath does with a homeopathic medicine and what a conventional doctor would do. A conventional doctor, if you went in and seen them, they would have given you a medicine. Let's say they would have given you digitalis to slow your heart down, or a beta blocker, more likely, to slow your heartbeat down. But as soon as you stop taking that beta blocker, your heartbeat actually speeds up, and it can get even faster. You can get a rebound effect from stopping the beta blocker too suddenly. So they're very good at that kind of a emergency medical intervention. But unfortunately, the drugs don't work by similars. They work by contrary. They work to forcibly reduce the rate in which the heart beats. And that's called the primary action of the drug. But there's always a secondary action to a drug. And we call that the rebound effect. So should you stop that medicine, say, oh, I've had enough of this beta blocker, I'm going to stop taking it, you will experience that symptom again 9 times out of 10. Mm-hmm. In homeopathic medicine, we're looking at the primary effect of the medicine, which in the Bushmaster snake is to accelerate the heartbeat, but we give it because it actually is based on the similars, not the contraries. So when you give it, the secondary effect of the medicine, and if you give it in a small enough dosage, you won't create the same thing you're trying to treat because you've reduced the toxicity, you've reduced the concentration. You do not create that aggravation, you just create the secondary effect, which is resolution. And that essentially is the body reacting to the medicine stimulus, but resolving the condition as a secondary reaction. And that's a huge difference. You have a long-term solution versus a very short-term solution. And this is really critical.
It was, quite amazing that, again, a snake venom, when I read about it, I realized that is a major symptom.
Yeah.
But
and you thought, why would I take a snake venom?
Yeah, well, I didn't. I just didn't. I just took it because that's the way it is. But the point is that all of these remedies and the ones that I have, now that was in this case of little glass vials with corks on them labeled in different dilutions.
How old were they?
Yeah, and I was about to say that. Now, so this was maybe 1980 or something.
Sure.
And Dr. Hayes had them at least maybe 80 years.
80 years before.
Before that.
Those were his medicines.
His medicines.
Yes, and they still work.
Still work
Yeah.
in a glass. Glass is the most neutral receptacle, right?
Yes.
A cork tightly kept on there. Yeah, and
I have medicines in my office that are over 100 years old.
Oh, sure.
And they work as well, if not better, than the day that they were made.
Interesting that they last. They don't deteriorate because they're the way that. Well, I don't know. The way they are.
There's no expiration
derived.
date.
There's no like most of the drugs that you buy. They say use before such and such a time.
That's
but
correct.
the thing that I find is a fact with homeopathic remedies is that they do what they're going to do or they're not, right? If it's not the proper match for your symptoms.
Yeah. If you miss it, I was prescribing on what I thought were your similars, but I didn't get it.
Because that's difficult, really.
Oh,
you have to have a lot of experience.
It's much more difficult than prescribing conventional drugs. And,
it has
and I
to
can
be.
guarantee that. Because you are looking at the whole body. We don't compartmentalize, I'm just going to treat your heart, or I'm just going to treat your nervous system.
Right.
No. The whole body is connected, and every part of it interacts. Your endocrine system interacts with your cardiovascular system. So, as you were saying, if you get the prescription wrong, nothing happens.
Yes.
There's no cure, but there's no side effect either, which is a wonderful thing.
Well, contrary to now, and again, using the ads that I see on the radio or television or whatever,
side effects.
This woman is walking around and she's got some cardiovascular problem.
She's very happy.
She's very happy.
Yeah.
And they'll say, I just take this once a day and look. But they don't say it cures. They'll say it manages.
Yeah.
But at the end, while she's walking around with her family and they're having a picnic, in the background it says, the side effects are heart attack, cancer, death. They even put death in there now, and all these things. And the list
those
gets
are the those are the side effects that they voluntarily list.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the ones that they chose to put on there. But if you really wanted to know all of them, it's a chapter in a book.
Well, these go on and on, then they end it,
Yeah.
But I heard that they were told, the people that sell these, not to have such a pleasant atmosphere you know, visually, when people are hearing these symptoms,
Yeah.
don't have the family hugging and having a picnic because it's
Right.
not, you know, it's contradictory and you shouldn't
Yeah.
do that, but they still do it.
Well, because our visual sense is a much stronger sense than our auditory sense. So we're going to remember that happy family at the picnic
right.
when we see our doctor and say, "Can I try that medicine?"
Yeah.
We're not going to remember that list of words.
Oh, yes.
It doesn't stick with us.
Oh, I see. That's true.
But
yeah.
you also have to remember that most Americans have no concept that there are other alternative
No.
methods. And only about 3% of the United States population utilizes homeopathic medicines.
3%.
3%. And most of them don't even see homeopathic practitioners.
yes.
They just buy things over the counter.
Oh, yes.
And that's a different picture when you look at Europe and Asia. In India, there are millions of people that use homeopathy on a regular basis. There are hundreds of thousands of homeopathic doctors
In India.
in India.
Yeah.
And in all of Europe, in most of Europe,
Yes.
homeopathy is an accepted, respected
Yes.
form of medicine and has been for the last 2 centuries.
Yeah,
It's
in the
part of the
UK,
National Health
right, of
Service
course.
in the UK.
Yeah, UK.
Yeah.
Well, the Queen and the whole
Queen,
family,
the royal
their
family,
whole
that's
royal
right.
family have
That's
always
right.
been treated
They don't
homeopathically.
talk about it too loudly.
No.
But they have used a
Yeah.
homeopathic physician
Yes.
since homeopathy came into existence.
But yeah, as you say, France, Germany,
Yeah.
Spain,
Yeah.
I mean, whatever,
Yeah.
it is there.
Yeah. And most conventional physicians in those countries either utilize homeopathic medicines themselves
Yes.
or they refer on a regular basis to homeopathic physicians and homeopathic practitioners. Much different story than here in the United States.
Well, the pharmaceutical industry, which you say is the biggest, most profitable in this country,
Yeah.
you know, and it's
Yeah.
growing, and the new drugs, every day there's a new name for something. I said, if I have a sore shoulder and I'm taking this one, then they say take this, oh, there's another one that I have to
Right.
try this one now,
Right.
how do I know? But I'm just saying that, yeah, it's incredible that this benign chemical that you're taking, that
The homeopathic
the
medicine.
homeopathic,
Yeah.
now these are so dilute and yet they function and stimulate or inform your body
Yeah.
of what to do,
Yeah.
and carrying a message, maybe an energy message or whatever the message
Well,
is, you know?
it's anyone's guess
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
People might say, well, there's no science to back up homeopathy, which is absolutely untrue. We do not know the mechanism of how homeopathy works, but we know that homeopathy works. And we have double-blinded studies that prove it. There are meta-analyses that prove it. And there are thousands of published research articles that are even posted online if you want to see them. But we know it works. We just don't have a good understanding of how does it work.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And incidentally, that never stopped us from using aspirin.
No.
Before we
Oh,
understood more of how it worked. We still don't completely understand it.
No, but even the drugs people take for their heart, they
Yeah.
don't know how they work at the molecular
people
level,
who-
let's say,
right.
or
There are
physiologically.
theories.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
receptor theories, and there
Yeah.
are calcium channel
No,
theories,
right.
and there's all sorts
Yeah.
of theories. Some of them hold water, and some of them don't.
Yes.
But it turns out that the majority of medical practices that we utilize
Yes.
conventionally, the majority have never been shown
Of course.
to work
Yeah.
scientifically without causing harm.
And yet they're putting this onus on homeopathy
Right,
and
right,
saying, well, we don't
right.
know how it works.
Well,
it just sounds
Right.
bizarre, and so they're
The
trying
argument
to,
is that if you're an alternative form of medicine, the bar is higher.
Oh, yes.
Because you have to prove
yes,
beyond
yes,
a shadow
yes.
of a doubt.
Sure.
But the evidence is very
Yes.
strong. It's not.
Well, one more thing
Yeah.
here. In Waterbury in 1918 was a flu epidemic of 1918
Correct.
killed how many hundreds of
Millions.
thousands, millions of
Millions.
people worldwide.
Yeah.
And in Waterbury, which had a population of maybe 65,000,
Yeah.
they had something like 6,000 people died
Yeah.
of
Huge.
flu,
Yeah, huge.
along with pneumonia,
Yeah.
the two.
Yeah.
And they turned churches into hospitals
Right.
and all kinds of buildings.
Right.
And one caught fire, and they had
Yeah.
to move all the patients
Yeah.
out to another building, and it was just dreadful. Well, Royal Hayes, Dr. Hayes,
He was
was
working
there.
at that time, yeah.
Yeah, and he was treating patients.
Yeah.
They'd come to his house where he had his office,
Yeah.
and he'd go to their homes,
Yeah.
and he'd spend the night with people and all that
Yeah.
kind of thing. He had approximately 900 or so patients.
Yeah. How many did he lose?
3.
Yeah, 3.
3.
And that's not unusual. There are records in these
Yeah.
homeopaths' offices and
Yeah.
that were published at the time and just
Yes.
kept in their books and ledgers.
Yeah.
And all homeopaths who were practicing real homeopathy, not some pseudo homeopathy,
Yeah.
they had death rates less than 3%.
No question. Yeah.
Whereas all conventional
Yeah.
treatment,
Well,
they were talking 30 to 40% death rates.
But 6,000
conventionally.
died.
Yeah.
And physicians were coming.
That's
the story
about
is
10%.
they were bringing their children to see Dr. Hayes because they didn't know what to do.
Right,
And
right.
or their family
Yeah,
or
yeah.
neighbors, whatever.
Yeah.
So
No, that information
but he
is
had
well
such
documented.
a success, with
Yeah.
a particular remedy. I mean, I don't remember
Yeah.
now. But
Well, they've studied, the interesting thing
Yeah.
about this, Dorothea, is that I've seen the data that's been compiled on the epidemic of 1918
Oh, yes.
and others. And it turns out that even if you do nothing,
Oh,
you
yes.
live longer
Oh,
than if you took
yeah.
the conventional treatment.
Yeah, well, that's another
Yeah.
point here today.
And aspirin
Yeah.
was one of the
Yeah.
main things that was used
that right?
during the 1918
Oh, I
epidemic.
didn't know that.
And they were telling people to take 10 and 20 and 30 pills of aspirin a day.
Oh.
And lo and behold, we find out later that it's deadly to take aspirin.
oh, my.
But this is how conventional medicine works. It generally is not based on science.
Yeah.
It's based upon, it seemed like a good idea at the time,
Yeah.
let's try it. But if you look at homeopathic medicine, there is a science of proving a medicine on a healthy person, getting a very detailed and accurate history of the person who is sick, and matching the most similar medicine to that, the law of similars.
Yeah.
That is a science, and it has been tested repeatedly throughout the world, and it has been shown again and again and again to be a major form of healing. Not just disease management, not just symptom suppression,
Yes.
but healing.
Well, I think the fact that it still exists, it serves millions of people around the world,
Yeah.
and countries accept it
Yeah.
and don't make fun of it or say, well, it's a mystery and we don't understand it, so let's, don't bother with it,
Well-
it's just bizarre.
Well, it actually, just to clarify that, it has been under continual attack.
Here.
Oh, here, but throughout the world.
Oh, yes.
Throughout the world. There was an Australian study released maybe 3 years ago that was a total sham, but it was released by the Australian government, and it was used to discredit homeopathy. They started out with hundreds of studies and narrowed, threw out everything except 5 studies and said, oh, based on these studies, homeopathy doesn't work in any condition that we know of.
Oh, good.
And it was widely publicized. So, no, homeopathy is ridiculed by many people, and homeopathy is attacked by many people.
Yes,
But
I know
usually
that.
when you look at it, the people who are doing the attacking either have had no experience with its use, have not bothered to educate themselves on the facts of homeopathy, or they are being supported by outside interests that have a vested interest in seeing
course.
homeopathy fail.
Yes, sure, that makes sense.
Homeopathy has been estimated in the United States to be almost a $3 billion industry as of 2015. That is a little bit of an exaggeration, I believe, and most of the pharmacists will tell you that's actually not accurate. But that is beginning to get on the radar of the conventional medical industry.
So-
And when you're talking already maybe about 1 to 2% of their annual sales, you're talking about $400 billion
wow.
of annual sales of
Yes.
conventional drugs just in the United States. It's beginning to get their attention, and they don't like that because it is actually as good as, and in many cases superior to conventional medicine.
Well, the number of people that die in hospitals, I mean, those, I don't have the figures with
I
me,
do.
I should have brought them. due to
conventional medicine
conventional
is the
medicine.
fifth leading cause of death in the United
Oh, you
States.
have that.
That's conventional medicines taken as prescribed. That's not including overdoses.
Really?
That's not
Wow.
including
Really?
abuse. That's conventional medicine as prescribed. Now, medical error is the third leading cause of death in the United States today.
And what is the first again? Taking prescribed
no, that's the
What?
fifth.
Oh,
the
fifth.
first leading cause of death is
excuse me.
cardiovascular
All right.
disease.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, but no, medical drugs are, medicine itself
Yes.
is the fifth leading cause of
right.
death,
All right.
which is huge.
It's huge. It's thousands of people.
Right. And homeopathy has never been documented to kill anyone. There's no side effects from the homeopathic medicines. You give the wrong medicine, what happens? Nothing. They're very safe, but I still recommend people use them rationally and use them based on the science.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to use a hammer like it's a screwdriver. It must be utilized in the way it is devised to be used and the way it's been tested to work.
Well, when a patient comes to see you, you, as I said, you discuss their entire body, their background, how they feel mentally, physically, whatever, and that's what the prescription is based on. Now, so many people
And
now
it's based on that because it works best when
you
it
do
matches most closely.
The best match.
Yes.
And you are an experienced person. You've had years of experience now. So you're able to match, listen and match. You look up in books that tell you what the match is and so forth. And these were published way 100 years ago.
Some of them are old, yes.
And they're done on the original research by
Yes.
Hahnemann and other people.
Yes.
But now when you go into some stores, you'll see homeopathic remedies
Yes.
in a row, and people are buying them. And one
Yes.
woman will say, "Oh, I really love this because it really helps me get rid of this." And,
Right.
and she figures out by herself
Yeah.
what to do.
Well,
and
she
there are
might, or
books
even
you can
the
buy.
label might say,
Yeah.
for sinusitis.
Yeah.
But I want to be clear about something. So what we've been talking about is called classical homeopathy.
Yes.
And that really means prescribing a single medicine on the basis of the totality of symptoms of an individual.
Yes.
But unfortunately, these medicines are very inexpensive to make. They're very
Oh, yes.
inexpensive
Oh,
to
yeah.
reproduce.
Yes.
There's very low profit potential from the pharmacies
of
who
course.
manufacture them. So the
That's the
pharmacies began to realize, hey, if we don't market something directly to the public,
Yeah.
we may not be able to support ourselves. So they started combining different medicines, not doing classical homeopathy,
see.
but doing what we call combination medicines.
Oh, they do that.
So they took a bunch of medicines that had strong symptoms, let's say, of sinuses or premenstrual syndrome or similar things, and they said, let's package them together and let's market them as a homeopathic medicine. But the medicines were prepared homeopathically, but that is not the way we prescribe homeopathic medicines.
yes.
So technically, they are really not homeopathic.
No.
The homeopathic process, as I said, has nothing to do with the amount of medicine or what we call the potency of the medicine. It has everything to do with the similarity of the medicine or the drug's ability to produce a similar set of symptoms in a healthy person. That is homeopathy. And so what you see on the shelf in the health food store may work, it may create some benefit, but it's sheer luck if it does.
Yeah.
It is technically, if you test those things, that is not testing homeopathy because that does not utilize the science or the strength of what's been shown to work homeopathically. That's using a hammer as if it was a screwdriver.
Yeah, well, that's applying, current medicine
That's right.
to homeopathy,
That's
where
correct.
aspirin for a headache. Well,
Yes.
will you have something for a headache that's less toxic than aspirin, which it may be.
Yeah.
But that's why you need, a person that's studied. I mean, you're an MD, so you've been through medical school. You know what it is. I mean, you're an official certified doctor, and yet you have homeopathic
Licensed
training,
doctor, yeah.
licensed doctor, and you've studied homeopathy, you've practiced it all these years.
Right.
So, this is what one should do to, and yet the cost of a homeopath compared to going to a regular doctor, allopathic doctors, they say, where they require X-rays, tests. Not that you don't ever depend on any of these tests; they're useful to you sometimes.
They can be.
And it's modern medicine. It's useful, sure. I'm just saying that people don't know that, and it's unfortunate that homeopathy has taken on. Saying, well, it's good. People are interested, but it's not truly going to see a physician that has the training and the experience.
Well, to be fair, there are people who are not doctors,
yes,
who are very competent
yes,
in homeopathy. And so there are naturopathic physicians who practice homeopathy. There are some nurses who practice homeopathy. There are some osteopathic physicians who practice homeopathy. But there are also people who have devoted a great amount of time to studying homeopathic medicines.
Oh, yeah.
There is a distinction because they may not have the full medical background. They have a homeopathic background. There may be limitations in what they do and what they might be able to achieve, but they can still be very competent practicing
I'm glad you
homeopathic
brought
medicine.
that up, because I didn't mean to say that one had to be an MD.
No, and I don't want to
right.
imply that either.
Yeah, because I have known a person like that who was very talented.
Yes.
She was able to do that and was very successful.
Some of the best homeopaths in the world may not have medical degrees, but they can be very good homeopaths.
But based on the original research done by Hahnemann,
who's a physician,
and saw that the conventional medicine at that time wasn't helping.
It was hurting.
They would bleed people, all the stuff they did, and they didn't have, quote, any other drugs, so-called. And so he went into this area, and it's amazing how this came upon him. But that's how things are.
It is how things are.
Other scientists in other areas, they just come out with things.
I would also wager to say that not much has changed since Hahnemann's time. That we still have a form of medicine that is extremely dangerous today, that is causing incredible harm to many people, that is being abused. Antibiotics are being abused today, overprescribed. That we have a very similar situation, and we have one thing they didn't have in Hahnemann's time, and that is the science to show how bad conventional medicine is.
Yes, true.
How dangerous it is. So this is not even alternative information. This is information that is published in the leading medical journals, British Medical Journal, Journal of the American Medical Association. There's no question that conventional medicine is extremely harmful.
I agree.
It does miracles in some respects, but for most conditions, or say for chronic conditions, it's not very good.
You're right, and it's. I'm being informed that our time is coming to an end.
Oh no!
We'll have to come back and do some more.
Okay. Whenever
once
you
get started, it's
Sure.
difficult to stop.
Well, it was my pleasure to
But it
speak
was
to you.
it was wonderful, and I just think this is something that people have not heard in the depth that you're presenting it.
It's like a secret.
Yeah.
People but I don't know how much seconds I have left.
Yeah,
but
that's all
people have a suspicion. People have an inkling that there's something not right in our medical field today.
I know that's true.
They're just not sure what it is,
Yeah.
and they're just not sure what the alternatives are.
Yes. So people can look up homeopaths,
They can look up homeopaths.
Some, like everything else, there's some better than others, some more successful than others, but through time you'll find
Well, they should interview whoever they go to.
Yeah.
Like you'd interview your doctor.
Of course.
You want to know their experience level, you want to know their training, you want to know, do they have certification?
Oh, yes.
Those are important questions to ask.
No question. I know our person hasn't come back yet. We probably have a minute left.
Have you been cut?
No. No, this is the end. I
Okay.
guess we are at the end.
All right.
But
Thank you
it
for
was
inviting me.
great. I enjoyed this, and I think I was very happy. I'm happy to have you here, and we'll do it again. I
Good.
mean, if you
Okay.
don't mind driving
Sure.
all that time
I-
distance, but
I'd love to.
it was worth it.
Okay.
Thank you. Shake your hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dorothea.